Okay, so thank you again for joining me. Meaning of Mitzvot. This week is Parshat Truma. I shall share on the screen and we'll get going. Okay, so Parshat Truma, compared to last week's Parshat Mishpatim, only has a few mitzvahs in there, but perhaps a very significant mitzvah that is the building of the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the desert, also the forerunner of the Beis Hamikdash, the temple in Yerushalayim. Says the Torah in very well-known words, "Va'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'socham." So the Truma starts with Hashem instructing Moshe Rabbeinu to speak to the Jewish people. V'chuli truma mi'ez kol ish asher yiveni liboy. Take for me an offering. Truma means an offering. For everybody whose heart motivates them to do so. And it says, go on and build the Mishkan. Make for me a mikdash, a sanctuary, a place of kedusha. The same word, mikdash is the same word as kadosh, kedusha, kaddish. The word holiness, a place of holiness. And I will dwell amongst them. Now, there are a number of fundamental questions on this verse. Firstly, the whole concept of how is it possible for human beings to make an abode for God in this world? Well, we know that the Midrash tells us, God says that the whole world, and in fact, this was one of Moshe Rabbeinu's questions to God. The Midrash says Moshe Rabbeinu asked God, how can the world contain you? We know that you fill the whole world. How is it possible we can build a physical structure in which you would be contained? That's the first thing. The second question is, surely the verse has an error in grammar. It should say, "V'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'soichoi," and I will build for me a sanctuary and I will dwell in it, in the singular. Build me somewhere where I can live and I'll build it. You tell someone, build me a house so I can live in that house. What does it mean I will dwell among them? So I hope we can look at two ideas there. Firstly, the fundamental concept of how is it possible that we could build a home for God in this world? And what do we mean by this idea of God asking us to build for him a sanctuary in this world? And the second idea is, what does it mean, b'soicham, amongst them, and not b'soicho, in it? So says the Sforno, the classic commentary on the Torah, he raises that very question. V'chein ta'aseh osam, kedei she'eshkom b'sochachem. So they should make it in order that I will dwell amongst them. And you see the word eshkoin is the same word, is the same shorish, the same root as the word shechina, the divine presence, the dwelling of God amongst us is called the shechina, the divine presence. So what is the purpose of it? Ledaber imecha, in order to speak with them or with you. L'kabel tfilas v'avodos Yisrael, and in order that to receive the prayers and the service of the Jewish people. So what is the purpose of the Mikdash? In order that God can speak with you and to receive our prayers and our service, meaning in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, the korbanos, the offerings. And it goes on and says, Lo kamo shahaya ha'inyan kodem ha'egel. So Sforno is asking this fundamental question. Why all of a sudden is God asking for us to build him a specific place for us to be able to talk with him to receive our prayers and our service? We've said previously, God says earlier on it says here, chapter 20, verse 21, we're now chapter 28, actually, it's actually 25. I'm sorry, it's actually chapter 25. But in chapter 20, earlier on in Shemos, God says, "In any place where you call my name, I will come and bless you." And in fact, we see that sometimes, in shuls above the Aron Kodesh. Sometimes you see that posture. Wherever you mention my name, I will come and bless you. Meaning that God isn't limited to a specific place. God doesn't need and the Jewish people don't need a specific place for us to be able to speak with God to come to bless us. God has already promised that wherever we mention his name, he will come and bless us. So Sforno explains that was before the Chet HaEgel, before the sin of the golden calf. God says, I'm openly available to you. After the sin of the golden calf, God says, you know what? You need to build me a specific place. We'll see why that is, why it needs to be a specific place. We'll see some more Kabbalistic idea of why we lost the ability to be able to, or why we now need specific places for us to be able to communicate with God, and God then to shower us with his blessings. So that answers the first question of why it's gone from being open communication to being limited to a specific place and the purpose of it. The next source I want to show you is another classic commentary, the Or HaChaim, who answers that the second question. Why does it say, make for me a sanctuary and I'll dwell amongst them and not in it? It doesn't say within it. Loma, Sisters Or Chaim, God was being very clear about this. If the people make a place holy enough for me to dwell in, then I will dwell within them. I'm not going to be confined to that space. That space is merely a preparatory stage for me in order to dwell amongst the Jewish people. It will be a focal point through which I will be able, my presence, my Shekhinah will be felt amongst the Jewish people. It will be found amongst the Jewish people, the children of Israel, that encircle the tabernacle with 4 banners. So not literally in the place itself, again, because God isn't limited to a specific place, but that will be the focus for which the Jewish people will find God dwelling amongst them. Does that make sense? Okay, let's go a little bit further. We now turn to the Sefer HaChinuch, who's now going to really answer the fundamental question of what is this idea of, what's the purpose of us making this sanctuary for God? Does God need it? What's the purpose of it? So says the Sefer HaChinuch. It's quite a long preamble to his answer, but it's important to see it nevertheless. He says, it's well known and famous among us, the people that accepted the mitzvahs, that there are 70 faces to the Torah. And in each of them, there are many great and numerous roots. And to each and every root is their branches. Each one supports a great cluster of fruits that are pleasant for hearts to ponder. Meaning there are many different ways for us to understand the Torah. At minimum, there are 70 different ways. You know, if you take a precious gem that has a number of facets, you could turn it and see something different each time. That's the same thing with the Torah. Each day they put out the flower for those who are constant over it, flowers of wisdom and good reasoning. The depths of it, wisdom enlightens the eyes. It is broad and surrounding, to the point that man does not have the power to grasp its end. As the wise king Shlomo HaMelech said in Koheles, I said that I would fathom it, I would find wisdom, but I am far from it. And with all of this, the hands of the one who is involved with it shall not tire. Whether he eats a little or much, it is all sweet. So straight away, the Sefer HaChinuch is telling us is that there are many levels on which we can understand Torah. Many of them we can understand. A lot of them we may not be able to understand. Shlomo HaMelech himself attests to the fact that he thought he would be able to acquire wisdom, but it was still far from him, the wisest person of all. And yet, if we attempt to understand it, then we'll find some satisfaction from it. That's the first thing to know. So what I think I was trying to say straight away is we can't totally understand this idea of why God instructed us to build a sanctuary for him. Nevertheless, let's attempt to understand it. He says, know, my son, that all of God's desire that human beings perform his commandments is only to do good to us. And by virtue of a person being prepared and ready, by doing those mitzvahs to receive the good, then God will be good to him. So straight away he's saying is the whole purpose of all mitzvot are for the benefit of the Jewish people. Our benefit, God doesn't have any benefit from it whatsoever, merely gives him the opportunity to give the good he wants to give to us. Therefore, the good path to be good, and the path is the path of Torah. For through it will a man be good. It comes out that all who uphold, accept God's mitzvahs, fulfill his desire to do good to us, in his then being fit to receive his goodness. But regarding anyone who does not ready himself for this, His evil is great as he knows God's desire is this, and he still makes his actions contrary to God's will. And one section of the Torah was written specifically to inform us of this fundamental principle. That is what is written in the Parshas Akev in Devarim. And now, Israel, what does the Lord God request from you? Etc., etc. That is to say, he's not asking anything from you, meaning God doesn't need us to do anything for him, because that would suggest a lack, a chisaron in God. If God is omnipotent, then God doesn't need us for anything. So that can't be the reason why he asks us to do it. So he's not asking anything from you in your performing his mitzvahs, beside his wanting in his great goodness to do good to you. Again, the analogy of a parent asking a child to do something for them. The parent doesn't necessarily need the child to do it. They do it because they want to be able to give of themselves to the child. And as it said afterwards, behold, to the Lord God, the Lord your God belongs the heavens and the heavens of the heavens and all that is in it. That is to say, he doesn't require your mitzvahs except out of his love for you and for your merit. Meaning God, like a loving parent, only wants the best for their child. So they tell them, do this and don't do that, not for their benefit, but for the child's benefit. And they do it out of the love for the child. And also to give them merit. When the child does what the parent wants them to do, then the parent is happy. Not that they need that, but it's something which is for the child's own good. Okay, and then we can carry on. And from here, in that this is the grounding of our opinion about the matter of his mitzvahs, blessed be he, we are obligated to say that the building of a house for God, may he be blessed, for us to do our prayers and sacrifices to him, it is all to prepare our hearts to his service, may he be elevated. So again, so the idea is, when the Torah says, make for me a sanctuary, God actually says, it's not actually for me, it's for you. In order that you are able to prepare yourselves to be able to receive the reward that God wants to give us. It is not from his need to sit in the house of people and to come under the shade of their beams, where they build it from cedar of Lebanon or from cypresses, as the heavens and the heavens and the heavens cannot contain him. And they only stand by his spirit. Surely the house that people built would not be needed for his glory, God forbid. Are the things not known and clear that it is all for the refinement of our bodies? As bodies are refined by actions, by the multiplication of good actions and their great constancy, the thoughts of the heart become purified, cleansed, and sanitized. And God desires the good of the creatures, as we have said. And I think we've talked about this on previous occasions, this idea of how our actions influence our character. And the more we repeat certain actions, the more they have an influence on our character. So, for example, a person who gives tzedakah on a regular basis becomes a charitable person, more than someone who gives one large gift one-off in a lifetime. That doesn't make them a charitable person because it doesn't influence their character. But we are influenced by our actions, and the more we do those actions, the more they impact upon us, and they refine us, and they make us better people. And that is the whole purpose here. That the building of the Mishkan is this preparation, this. And he goes on to say, and maybe he, blessed be he, chose that place and prepared it for the good of the people, from its being exactly at the center of the world, and the center is the choicest and the ends. Or for another reason, that he, blessed be he, would be its knower, and through the refinement of action, purification of thought that we will have there, our minds will rise to clinging with the highest mind. So it's a place where, if that's the focal point of our performance of mitzvot, then that is the place where we have the closest potential to have a connection with God himself, which, as we know, if God is the source of all good, then to have a connection with the source of good is for our benefit. You know, again, like the mashal, you know, if you need electricity to power an appliance, then you have to be connected to the source of power. Similarly, if we want to benefit from God's goodness, we have to be connected to that source of goodness. Therefore, God, in his love for us and wanting to merit us, tells us, build a place where you can connect to me. Not for my benefit, because I can connect you wherever, but for your benefit. You will be able to focus your minds and concentrate at that place. That's the first thing. And then, final paragraph, he says, I have found with the Ramban, Nachmanides, may he be blessed, an explanation of the level of a simple meaning similar to this reason. As he wrote in Vayikra, in the name of others. And this is his language. So he's now quoting the Ramban, Nachmanides. Since the deeds of people are determined by thought, speech, and action, God, may he be blessed, commanded that when he sins, he brings a sacrifice and places hands upon him corresponding to the deed, and confess with his mouth corresponding to the speech, and burn the innards of the kidneys as they are the instruments of thought and desire. And the limbs of the sacrifice correspond to the hands and feet of a person that does all of his work. And he sprinkles the blood on the altar corresponding to the blood of his soul. So the person think in doing all of this that he sinned to God with his body and his soul. And it's fit for him that his blood be spilled and his body burnt, were it not for the kindness of the Creator, who took an exchange and ransom for him in the sacrifice, that is, its blood be instead of his blood, and its soul be instead of his soul. So now, quoting the Ramban, is discussing the idea of what took place mainly in the Mikdash, in the Beis HaMikdash, and in the Mishkan, with the korbanos, with the sacrifices. And the question is, what's the whole purpose of taking animals, sacrificing them? We'll see there's huge amounts of material on exactly how the order of the sacrifices were to take place, what they used to put on the altar, what they didn't, where they sprinkled the blood, etc., etc. All of this, what's the purpose of it? Again, is it for God's benefit? Does God care what animal we take or how we do it? No, it's all about for our benefit, that we understand that God has given us a path through which we can connect to him and therefore receive his blessings. But we also have free will. And therefore, if we go against that and do things which are to the contrary of that, we also have a path, a route back to him. But we have to understand that the truth is, having gone against his will, we are in some way deserving of the fate that happens to these animals. But God in his love and his kindness for us doesn't want that to happen to us. And therefore, instead, he exchanged us for those animals. But we learn through that. The person doing it is meant to confess on it. They're meant to accept that there's an exchange. They were meant to be put on the altar themselves. But God didn't want that to happen. It takes an animal instead. That's one way of looking at it. We haven't got time now. There's a famous Rambam on this, Maimonides on this, in Moreh Nevuchim, in his Guide for the Perplexed, in which he explains the machlokas between the Ramban and the Rambam, Nachmanides and Maimonides. The Rambam is of the opinion that the Beis HaMikdash, and particularly the korbanos, the sacrifices, were a temporary measure to wean the Jewish people off idolatrous practices. And the Rambam felt that once we came out of Egypt, having been surrounded by the idolatry of Egypt, it would have been too difficult for the Jewish people to completely abandon that. Remember, we sunk to such a low, 49th level of spiritual impurity. It would have been impossible for us to, according to the Rambam, to approach God without the physical expression of service through sacrificial offerings. And therefore, says the Rambam, the whole purpose of the sacrifices was to slowly wean us off idolatry to pure service of God. But according to the Rambam, ultimately we wouldn't need them in the future. According to the Rambam, when the third Beis HaMikdash is built, there won't be animal sacrifices as there were previously, because we won't need them anymore. And the truth is, as we know, that although idolatry is still forbidden, none of us really, wake up in the morning and think, I really want to bow down to an idol, or I really want to worship the sun today. Some will argue that there are other things which people worship, money and fame and wealth, whatever it is. But the taiva, the Chazal say that the desire for idolatry has disappeared from this world. Mm-hmm. I say at the same time, actually, as nevuah, as prophecy also, but that's another question. But so we see there are two ways of looking at it. But either way, the whole purpose of the Beis HaMikdash, the tabernacle, the Mishkan, was for our benefit, for us to be a focal point for our connection to God in this world. God didn't need any of it at all. Okay, I want to share with you a slightly more Kabbalistic, more esoteric idea of this idea of the Mishkan, of the Mikdash, why it was Vasuli Mikdash. If you look at the verse again, Vasu, this word Mikdash, as we said, the word Kadosh, holiness. What is this idea of holiness, and why is it focused on this particular place in this world? So I share with you the Ber Maim Chaim. The Ber Maim Chaim was a Hasidic Rebbe called Rebbe Chaim of Chernovich, He wrote a classic Hasidic commentary on the Torah. We'll see two excerpts of it, hopefully. First one is from Devarim, the other one is from Shemos. So here is sort of a side issue, but it touches on what we've got here. He says, he's talking about the possible, how is it possible for the holiness of God to be connected to us in this world? He says the following. So there's no English translation, but I'll translate it. He taketh his tagalas hara min hamakom hahu ali the adam shemishrach bedusha sham b'torah or b'tefillah masim tovim. When we are able to remove anything negative in a certain place or a certain time, either through learning Torah or through prayer or through good deeds, that pushes away anything negative that may be amongst us. And therefore, as take of kashin is talek hara shira hakadusha v'or Hashem ala makom hahu. What happens if you are able to push away this negative stuff? Then the holiness and the light of God is able to dwell in this place. So first you have to know that God, being all good and all holy, cannot dwell in a place where there is evil or negative things or unholiness. But if we can remove those things, then there's space for God to dwell. God fills the whole world, his glory fills the whole world, and his eyes rule over everything in this world. God desires greatly God only wants to spread the light of his holiness and his connection and involvement in the world to those who are able to benefit from the goodness which he has in abundance without end. Yeah, what basically we're saying is this: God is always looking to be able to fill receptacles with his holiness and with his goodness. But those receptacles have to be ready for it. They have to be fit to accept it. You can't, let's take another analogy. If you take a bucket full of sand and you want to put water in it, okay, you can get a little bit of water into it, but not very much. Probably not a good analogy. If you've got a bucket full of water, you can't add water to it. Yeah, you have to empty out the bucket and then fill it with more. Similarly here, yeah, if we are in a place where it's filled with the opposite of holiness and goodness, the only way to be able to fill it with holiness and goodness is to remove that negative stuff, and then it will fill up with goodness. Why? God is constantly waiting and prepared out of his great love and joy to bless the Jewish people with his love. As it says about us, that's why it says. That's why God says, make for me a place of good, make for me a place of Kedusha, and I will dwell amongst them. Meaning, if you prepare a place of Kedusha, I will fill it. And he says, you shall see how the commentaries say. It doesn't say I'll dwell in it, ella in them. In each individual. If any individual who makes himself a worthy receptacle, a recipient for God's love and his blessings and his holiness and his goodness, then God will fill up that person. Ki mikdash, and this is the key point here. Ki mikdash loshen hazmanahu. Because the word mikdash, the word holiness, is actually the language of preparation. To be mekadesh, to make something holy, means to make it ready, prepare it for something else. We are mekadesh Shabbos, yeah? How do we make Shabbos different? We prepare it. We make it different by the things we do in order to set it apart from the rest of the week. Marriage is called kiddushin. Why? Because we act in a way which makes it different from any other relationship we have in this world. So Mukadesh is a language of preparation. And any form of holiness requires a preparation before so. As it's explained in the Zohar, and the whole purpose of this preparation is merely to drive away the negative forces. Sitra achra is this idea of the Yetzer Hara, the negative forces that are around us. And those things which, the klippa means like the outer casings of things which are barriers for holiness and goodness. Because they fill up all the empty spaces in the world, as known. And a person has to drive them away. And then the holiness is ready to come in and dwell in that place. So it's about displacement. We have to displace the negative in order that the positive, the holiness, can come in. That's the whole idea of kedusha, of preparing a place for holiness. V'alkein, that's why it says, "V'asuli mikdash, make for me a mikdash." Shezminot atzmam ela kedusha. We have to prepare ourselves for this holiness, as it says in the Zohar, B'tikkun Otam, "Zakam ma'an da'avid le dira na'er beliba." That those who prepare a place, a nice place within their heart, will merit that holiness to dwell in it. That needs to purify the heart from thoughts of wrongdoing and taivas and chamados haraim and negative desires and things that we want to do, or taivas olam hazeh, or desires for things in this world. Shekulam nimshakum mishurish hara v'asitra achra, because they all draw on from negative forces and sources, and from these sitra achra, these negative ideas. So any physical or physical desires are things which just draw us away from kedusha. Because a person who is constantly chasing after physical desires of this world, is like an animal who's just completely lost to the holiness of the world. Yeah, an animal always not thinking about anything else except for its physical needs. A human being who's only thinking about their physical needs is detached from spirituality. However, the person who purifies himself to uproot from themselves the source of all this desire, it's as if they are making a nice dwelling place for which the holiness can dwell in. And that's what it means. If you make a holy place within yourself, meaning if you make room in your existence for holiness, for God's existence, for spiritual things, then God will fill that place within each and every one of us. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So this now takes that verse completely beyond this idea of there being a physical structure. That's merely a focal point. But ultimately, it's about us all making ourselves a fitting dwelling place for holiness and God's goodness. And then this final source, he says, similar idea. He says, the apostle Kedoshim to you. In Vayikra it tells us, Kedoshim to you, you shall be holy. There's an overarching requirement for us to be holy people. Avin Amar, so it says in the Midrash, on Yerushalayim, the Kasuf Hazeh al Derech Omrim Zatzal, Medina Sha'asu Shalosh Ataros. He talks about, it gives a mashal of a king who has 3 crowns made for him. What does he do with those 3 crowns? He puts 1 on his head and 2 on his son's head. Similarly, before God, every day, 3 Kedushas are said. We say in the Amidah, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. What are we doing? We are, in some way, placing crowns upon God's head. What does God do with those? Let me just find the cursor. What does God do with those? No, some Barosho, he puts 1 on his head. And then 2 he puts on the heads of the Jewish people. What does that mean? The whole aspect of the holiness that God gives to the Jewish people is through us being Mekadesh, us sanctifying Him. Through all of this, through us calling out these kedushas, we are making a place for which the holiness of God can come and dwell with us. So firstly, we sanctify God. We place the crown on God's head, and God then places those crowns upon us. And that's why it says, "Va'asuli mikdash," make for me mikdash. Shehem yasu duvarim ke'ele, do these things. To you, roim and mekadesh Hashem, in order to sanctify God. Li'tater b'kodesh, to crown Him in holiness. That's why the verse starts off by saying, take for me an offering. Klomar, amor lahem, say to the Jewish people, Shehima lochkim ata dava gadol. Tell them you're taking something great here. Kazashehu li truma, it's an offering for me. Atara l'roshi, it's a crown for my head. V'ani mitromam, I will give a donation gift to you. Metater bazeh malachei malab. And if you are sanctifying me, I will in turn come and sanctify you. We have to do the preparation first. That idea of Kedusha is that we are paving the way for the Kedusha in order that God can sanctify us by placing that crown of His holiness upon our heads. I know that's a very Kabbalistic idea, but that's what we are doing. This idea of being the Kadesh, of Asuli Mikdash, is that we are being Zamein. We are creating the space, the ability, the room for God to sanctify us. And what does that sanctity mean? It means that we are worthy, we are recipients of His blessings and His goodness and everything that He wants to give to us. Again, like a parent to a child, and a parent will say to a child, do X, Y, and Z. Why? Because then the parent, they can give to the child what they want to give them. But the child has to do their part as well. You know, a good parent can't just give to their children without any expectation, because then the child doesn't appreciate it and doesn't value it, and also has no sense of self-worth and achievement themselves. So you give them the ability, you encourage them, you say to them, in those words, make for me a sanctuary and I will dwell amongst them. You've got to do the groundwork. You've got to put in the effort. You've got to set aside space in which I can then fill with the good and the blessings that I want to give you. I hope that makes sense. A different way of looking at that very well-known posuk. Yeah, any thoughts?
Very good way of looking at it.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think the fact that the synagogues have been shut for many, many months hasn't affected the community itself, though, because I think people appreciate all the other things that go on as well.
Right.
Indeed.
That's nice. Yeah, very nice idea. We actually, yes, okay. A shul, we say, is a mikdash ma'at. Mikdash, it's a small sanctuary. It reminds us of the great Beis Hamikdash, but even without it, we've survived 2,000 years without the Beis Hamikdash. Survived, I don't know how many days, but a number of days without the shuls being open. We can survive because ultimately it is God's not limited to a particular place. You don't have to go to shul just in order for God to hear your tefillahs. Yes, there's an added benefit to it. Similarly, there's an added benefit to having a temple, but it's not God's presence, His Shekhinah dwelling within us, is not contingent on a specific place, because God's not limited to any place. But wherever we make a space for him, God fills that place. Go back to God says, wherever you mention my name, meaning wherever you are connected to me, I'm connected to you. And you put the plug in, and you switch it on, then the flow continues.
Mhm.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Any